She was still wearing black when she knocked on my door. That alone should tell you this story was never going to be simple. It was exactly one day after the funeral. One day after the neighborhood stood in small, uncomfortable clusters on the sidewalk, whispering in that way people do when death arrives without warning. One day after I watched from my window, too far away to help, too close to pretend I didn't see. And now she was here, on my porch, in the cold. Her name was Eliza Matthews. She was 36 years old. Her husband had died 4 days ago from a sudden cardiac arrest, no warning, no goodbye, just gone. And the day after she buried him, she was standing at my door holding a small ceramic mug in both hands, like it was the only solid thing left in her world. I am James Carter. I am 32. I work numbers for a living and I live alone and I like my life predictable. I had no idea what to do with the woman standing on my porch, but I opened the door anyway. I did not know what the right thing to do was. I am not someone people come to in a crisis. I am not warm in an obvious way. I do not have the easy comfort of someone who knows what to say. I am the kind of person who sends a card 3 days late because I spent 2 of those days trying to find the right words and gave up and bought the most generic one on the rack. But she was standing there, and she looked like someone who had been holding herself together for 4 days in front of other people and had run completely out of the ability to do that. So I stepped back. "Come in," I said. She walked through the door slowly, looking around my living room like she was orienting herself, like she needed to understand the geography before she could settle. I took her coat without asking. I put the kettle on without asking, because sometimes the only useful thing you can do is give someone a warm cup of something and not require them to make a single decision. She sat on the couch. I sat in the armchair across from her, and neither of us said anything for a long time. I did not try to fill the silence with comfort I did not have. I did not ask how she was doing, because we both would have known that was a meaningless question. I did not tell her it was going to be okay, because I did not know that, and she did not need to hear something hollow. I just sat there, present, still. The steam rose from her mug. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly. And then, finally, she spoke. "It's too quiet next door," she said. Her voice was low, careful, like she was testing each word before she released it. I thought I could handle it, being in that house, but the quiet has a weight to it tonight, and I didn't want to be alone with that kind of weight. I nodded. "You don't need to explain," I said. She looked at me like that surprised her, like she had expected to have to justify herself, to offer more reasons, to earn the right to be there. And I understood in that moment that someone had been making her earn things for a long time. She started talking after a while, not about the funeral, not about logistics or what people had said or what came next. She talked about her marriage. She talked about the years when the distance between her and Mark grew from something manageable into something vast, how his work consumed him slowly, then completely, how conversations became shorter and more practical. How she would sit at the dinner table and he would sit across from her, and they would both eat, and nothing real would pass between them. "Have you ever felt lonely?" she said, "while someone was sitting right across from you?" I knew the answer to that. I had lived that answer for over a year with someone I once loved. "Yes," I said, "more than once." She nodded slowly, processing. Then she looked at me with a directness that caught me slightly off guard. "I know this sounds terrible, but part of me feels like I already grieved him. Not yesterday, not at the funeral, years ago. When I first understood we had become strangers." She paused. "I think I cried for the marriage long before I cried for the man." She waited for me to recoil, to offer a polite correction, to make her feel guilty for saying something true. I did not. "That doesn't sound terrible," I said. "That sounds honest." Something in her changed, just slightly, just enough. Before she left that first night, she stood near my front door and looked back at the room, just for a moment, taking it in the lamp, the books, the second-hand couch, the ordinary simplicity of a space lived in by one quiet person. Then she gave me a small smile, not performance, not gratitude, just something real and slightly surprised. "It's warm here," she said. Then she walked back across the yard, back into the house with its heavy silence, back into the life that had just become entirely unfamiliar. I stood in my living room for a long time after the door closed, holding the mug she had used, which was still warm, thinking about those 2 words. It's warm here. I do not know why they stayed with me so strongly. My house was not special. It was ordinary in every way, but maybe that was the point. Maybe after days of being surrounded by ceremony and condolence and careful public grief, ordinary felt like relief. I did not sleep well that night. The next morning I could not work. I sat at my desk staring at the same spreadsheet for 40 minutes. The numbers looked like noise. My mind kept circling back to her, to the mug, to the tan line on her finger I had noticed and immediately looked away from, to the way she said it's warm here like it was something she had not expected to find. I told myself I was overthinking it. She was a grieving woman who had needed somewhere to sit. I was a neighbor who had an empty couch. That was the entire story. Around noon there was a knock. She stood at the door in jeans, sneakers, and a grey hoodie that had clearly been worn for at least 2 days. No coat despite the cold, no makeup, hair loose. In her hands were 2 brown paper deli bags. "I figured you forgot to eat," she said. "I know I did." A pause. "Eating alone is slightly less sad if you do it next to another person." I laughed. It came out before I could be careful about it. She stepped inside like she had been doing it for years. We went out to the back patio under a grey sky and ate sandwiches, and she told me her turkey versus roast beef. Opinion and I told her she was wrong, and she looked at me with great patience and said my taste was questionable. We talked about nothing important, and it was the best conversation I had in months. Then somewhere in the middle of it she reached for the chip bag and her hand brushed mine on the table. 1 second, maybe less. Neither of us moved immediately. After the lunch, after the chips and the sandwich opinions and the laugh that surprised her, she went quiet in the way she did when something real was forming. "Have you ever felt like you were disappearing inside your own life?" she asked, looking at the fence, not at me. "Like you were doing everything right, checking every box. And one day you looked around and realized you had no idea who you actually were anymore." I thought about the last year with Dana, about learning to want what the moment required and slowly forgetting what I actually wanted, about becoming a good reflection of someone else's life and losing the outline of my own. "Yes," I said. More than once. She looked at me then. Really looked at me, the way people almost never do directly, without armor, without the social performance of eye contact. "Actually seeing, you understand that," she said, not a question. "I understand that," I said. A minute later her hand brushed mine on the table and she pulled it back and reached for the chips like they required her full attention. I looked at the fence. The sky pressed down. Neither of us mentioned it. Before she left, she gathered the bags and I could see something shifting in her, some internal alarm going off. "I should go," she said. "This is probably too much. Too soon." "You're not doing anything wrong," I said. "And you're not a problem." She stopped, stood there with the bags in her hands, met my eyes, then she nodded once and left. I stayed at that table in the cold for a while. I did not tell myself it was nothing. 3 days later the knock came again. This time something was different. She stood at the door in a navy blue sweater slightly off one shoulder, dark leggings, slip-on shoes like she had left before she could change her mind. No coat. The air was 38 degrees. She had not noticed or had not cared. Her eyes were tired, but there was something focused in them, like someone who had been awake most of the night and arrived, finally, at a decision. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Always," I said. She walked into the living room and stood in the middle of it for a moment like she was not sure she had the right to be there. Then she sat on the couch, pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, made herself small. I sat in the armchair. I waited. "I don't want to go back tonight," she said eventually. "Not because I'm running from something. I can't get enough air in that house." Every room as she stopped, started again. "It's not grief exactly. It's more like the walls remember everything and I can't stop hearing all of it." I understood that completely, the way a space can hold the echo of someone who no longer lives in it. "Stay here," I said. "I'll set up the guest room." Her eyes filled. The tears did not fall. "I didn't expect that," she whispered. "You don't have to be alone in this," I said. I went to the closet and pulled out the good sheets, not the worn ones I kept for myself. The clean ones, the ones that still held their original softness. I made up the spare bedroom. I did not make it into anything ceremonial. I did not light a candle or put flowers on the nightstand or say something meaningful about what it meant that she was staying. I just tucked the corners, smoothed the pillowcase, turned on the small lamp on the nightstand so the room would feel less cold when she walked in. She stood in the doorway watching me for a moment. "You don't have to do all that," she said. "It's a bed," I said. "Everyone deserves a made bed." She was quiet for a second. "When was the last time someone did something like that for you?" she asked. I thought about it. Longer than the question probably deserved. "I'm not sure," I said. She nodded slowly, like that answered something she had not quite been asking. That evening passed quietly. I made chamomile tea. She sat on the couch while I put the spare room together, and we talked about nothing important. She asked about a photograph on the wall, my brother and me on a hiking trail years ago, and I told her the story of that trip, which involved a wrong turn, a very steep incline, and a gas station sandwich that we have both chosen never to forgive. She laughed. It caught her off guard again, just like on the patio. She laughed like someone who had not planned to. Before she went to bed, she came back into the living room and stood near the door. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking me to perform being okay, for letting me just be whatever I actually am tonight." Then she crossed the room and hugged me. It was not romantic. It was not rushed or charged or loaded with meaning beyond what it was. It was one person holding another the way you hold someone when the words have run out of road. Her head rested against my shoulder. I held her steady. One hand on her back, nothing gripping, just present. That was all it was. That was everything it needed to be. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," I said. She walked down the hallway. I stood where I was for a long moment after she disappeared. "Morning," she said. "Hey, coffee's ready." She came and stood beside me at the window. We both looked out at the yard, dormant grass, bare shrubs, pale morning light, and neither of us said anything for a while. It was not awkward. It was calm. "I have no idea what I'm doing," she said eventually. "I don't think you're supposed to right now," I said. "I think you're just getting through the next hour." She leaned her shoulder against mine, lightly, without thinking about it. "I can breathe here," she said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that." That evening I made pasta, basic, nothing impressive. She stood beside me in the kitchen, handing me things without being asked: a spoon, a lid, salt, with this quiet, easy competence, like we had done this before. Like this kitchen was partly hers. We ate at the table, talked about nothing important, disagreed about pineapple. The conversation drifted from meaningful to silly without either of us managing the transition. The lamp above the table made everything warm. Later, on the couch, a nature documentary played softly in the background, something about migratory birds. She had her feet tucked beneath her, leaning into the cushions. I sat beside her, close. The room was very quiet. She lifted her head and looked at me. The space between us was small. I could see her eyes in the lamp, light green and tired and honest, and the moment had that specific quality of absolute stillness that means something is either going to happen or pass, and both people know it, and neither is entirely sure which direction is right. She leaned forward. The kiss was soft, brief, careful in the way that first moments are when both people understand the weight of them. She pulled back immediately after, searching my face. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. I'm not sure why I did that." "I am," I said. She held my gaze for a long moment. Then she rested her head against my chest. I put my arm around her. We stayed exactly like that for a long time, listening to the quiet. Neither of us said anything else. The documentary played. The room breathed. She went back to her own house the next morning. She said she needed to face it, to sit inside the space, to sort through what was real, to grieve the parts that deserved grieving, and let go of the parts that had already let go of her. I understood. I told her she did not need to explain herself. She came over every day anyway. Some mornings just for coffee. Some evenings with groceries and an opinion about dinner. Some afternoons she simply arrived and sat, and we did our own things in the same quiet space, parallel and easy. There were days she cried, real, full crying that she said she had not been able to do at the funeral because too many people were watching. I sat with her on those days. I did not try to fix anything. I just stayed close. And there were days she laughed hard enough that she had to set her mug down. I kept those days carefully. A month in, she repainted the study in her house. A deep, warm ocean blew her choice, entirely hers, the first room she had changed in years. She sent me a photo mid-project, walls half blue, roller in hand, grinning with paint on her forearm. I stared at that photo for longer than was strictly necessary. She was coming back to herself, and somehow so was I. About a month after everything had begun, she texted me, "Come over for dinner. I want to cook this time." I walked across the yard and into her house for the first time since everything had happened. The air was different. The windows were open. Even in the cool evening she had opened them, letting air move through spaces that had been closed for too long. A small speaker on the counter played something quiet and unhurried. Something on the stove smelled like garlic and butter and the beginning of something warm. She stood in the kitchen in an apron she absolutely did not need for what she was making, and when she heard me she looked up with a smile that reached all the way. We ate on the back patio. The sun went down slowly orange, then rose, then a deep quiet blue. The evening was clear and cool and the kind of beautiful that does not announce itself. We were halfway through the meal when she went quiet in the way that meant something was forming. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what?" I asked. "To move forward." She paused. "Not to forget. I don't want to pretend none of it mattered. I just want to continue. To go towards something rather than just away from what was." She reached across the table. Her hand rested in mine. When I tried to imagine forward, she said softly, "You're in it. You keep showing up in what I picture. And I don't think that's an accident." I held her hand and thought about every careful, deliberate choice I had ever made. Every time I had waited for the right moment to step towards something. Every time I had let fear dress itself up as patience. "Well, take it slow," I said. "Yes," she said, "but we'll go." She smiled. A full, real smile that reached her eyes. A year later, we sat on my front porch on a warm spring evening. The neighborhood had gone soft and golden around us. Trees had come back to full green. Someone 3 houses down was grilling something. A kid rode a bike slowly across the end of the street. The world was ordinary in the best possible way. She had her head on my shoulder. Her feet were tucked beneath her on the porch swing. I had my arm around her the way I had done 100 times by then, easy, natural, like a thing that had always been true, and we had simply discovered it. She was quiet for a while, the kind of quiet that was full rather than empty. "I used to think my life was already written," she said softly, "that the story was what it was, and I just had to see it through to the end." "And now?" I asked. She looked out at the street. At the trees, the evening light, the ordinary, beautiful world. "Now I think it was just waiting," she said. "The good part was just waiting." I kissed her forehead. She leaned in closer. The evening stretched around us, unhurried and whole. "Here is what I have come to believe after everything. Love does not always arrive the way we expect it to. It does not always come with clarity or ceremony or perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives quietly, the day after something breaks. The afternoon someone walks across a yard and knocks on a door they have never knocked on before. Sometimes it finds you in the most ordinary moment, on a back patio under a grey sky, in a kitchen with cold coffee, in a silence that somehow manages to feel full instead of empty. The bravest thing either of us did was simple. She knocked. I opened the door. And we both decided, one quiet day at a time, that showing up for each other honestly, without armor, without waiting for the world to tell us the timing was right, was worth more than any version of safe we had ever known. That is what love asks of you, at the end of every ordinary day. Not perfection, not certainty, not the right moment, just the willingness to knock, and the courage to let someone in.